be a very important session. We'll be focusing on a story of hope, and it's very aptly named From Breakthrough to Impact, focusing on the science that we need to drive solutions that restore Amazonian ecosystems, but also uplifting local livelihoods. Now, this kind of discussion we'll have today is not going to come in vacuum. This is a real case study of an amazing, hopeful story from our two wonderful scientists next to me. And we have three really leading voices at the Science Policy Nexus and Biodiversity Monitoring that have joined us virtually. So maybe I just want to quickly mention that it's clear we are in a very critical point where we're operating beyond 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries that define our planet's stability. However, the science that we have right now has never been stronger to guide us back into a safe operating space. And this has been proven. And so the discussion today is about turning that science into action. It's about looking how breakthrough research that is awarded, recognized, and celebrated can move beyond academic recognition and reshape systems on the ground through policy and in the lives of local communities. And the story we'll explore is from Professor Carlos Perez and Dr. João Vitor Campos. João Vitor Campos Silva, who is saying name incorrectly, from the Instituto Juruá. And through their work, they've shared a $1 million prize money as they were the international champions of the first edition of the Frontiers Planet Prize, a prize that is the largest prize scientific competition that looks at recognizing breakthrough research that advances our understanding of the planet and comes up with solutions to bring us back into a safe operating space. And through their work in this institute, they have managed to implement a community-based conservation model that has protected 15 million hectares of floodplain forest across the Juruá, as well as supporting 140 communities in that space. So true impacts, also restoring aquatic degraded ecosystems, namely the Arapaima fish, which has seen an exponential increase in population growth since. And the points that I would like us all to take home today is that this work shows that ecological recovery and human well-being are not competing goals on a research agenda. They are deeply interconnected. And so through this collaboration with the prize, we'll be seeing how these kind of case studies can act as a true blueprint that we can replicate in other vulnerable bioregions across the world that potentially do not have as much visibility as the Amazon forest. And we'll be looking at what are those enabling conditions of this kind of research that we can use to scale this model and how we can better align research, funding, governance, and policy so that this science can lead where it really has to, and that is with impact. So with that quite lengthy start, it's my pleasure to welcome all of our speakers who will bring unique perspectives on how the science can help us both understand the boundaries and restore its balance. So I've mentioned we have on my left here, Dr. João Campos Silva, who is the president of the Instituto Juruá, and also does a lot of work directly in research, but then still active in academia. And then next to him, I have Professor Carlos Perez, who is a professor from University of East Anglia and a visiting professor at Yale University, published over 400 articles on neotropical ecosystems. Together, well, they were the inaugural winners of the Frontiers Planet Prize in 2023. Online, hopefully you can see them. We have Professor Mercedes Bustamente, who is the vice president of the Brazilian Academy of Sciences and also a professor at Universidade Brasileira. And she is a leading jury member from the jury of 100 of the prize. We also have Dr. Mariana Napolitano Pereira, who is the science director at WWF Brazil and a contributor of Frontiers in Science article on conservation imperatives. And last but not least, I'm pleased to welcome Professor Andy Purvis, who is from the Natural History Museum and is a global leader in global biodiversity modeling. So hopefully we'll be able to see them on screen. Yes, there they are. Welcome to our panelists who have joined us online. Okay, so I'd like to start off by asking our researchers here, so João and Carlos, Your work has been instrumental in understanding sustainable use protected areas across the Amazon. Could you start off by describing the origins of this research, what led you to conduct this kind of work? And to date, what are the measurable impacts that you've seen in terms of biodiversity and also with local livelihoods? So Joao, do you want to kick us off?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Gilbert. It's an honor to be here. Well, I believe that the conservation science paradigm is changing a lot over the last decades, moving from a more top-down way to do science and to do conservation for a more inclusive conservation. And this is very important because at least in Amazonia and most tropical countries, indigenous people are living here for at least 12,000 years. And this is not like a passive coexistence with nature. They are interacting for food, for medicine, for housing. And this process of coexistence led to the development of very important technologies in terms of relationship between human and nature. So to think the Amazon in the future, it's very important to include those types of knowledge for a better comprehension, for a better understanding of the nature and the ecological process, but also to design efficient tools to ensure the protection of biodiversity and livelihoods. We have been working in a very interesting region in Amazon, which is the Juruá River. This is a place uh, where we can see a very strong social organization. People in the past used to live almost as slavery during the rubber exploitation, but then due to the social organization, they built grassroots organizations that are very important to implement the governance models in that region. So basically, now they are organized in sustainable use protected areas, but also in indigenous territories. And they have a very peculiar model of governance where they can protect the territories and they can generate important social benefits through biodiversity-based value chains. Basically, the biodiversity-based value chains, which is called social bioeconomic here in Amazon, are very important because they ensure the territorial protection, but they also create opportunities to improve the quality of life of local dwellers. And as a result, right now, for example, only in the Arapaima management, the Pirarucu management, which is the largest freshwater scaled fish on Earth, we have around 4 million hectares at Churua protected by local communities. The population, the wild population of Pirarucu increased almost 500% over the last 15 years. We can find like 50 folds more, 50 times more fish in protected lakes compared to unprotected lakes. And many other aquatic species are recovering as well. Also, the income generated through this arrangement help to improve the infrastructure in the communities. For example, they build like solar panel equipments, and they also can have better schools and better opportunities in general. So basically, this is a very promising model in terms of alignment of people well-being and biodiversity protection. Finally, I think that to move forward in this perspective and to expand this model, we need basically three pathways. One is to reshape the way that we do science. We do not need to integrate local knowledge in science, but we need to establish a new relationship, a more horizontal relationship, a respectful relationship to co-design solutions together. Local people do not want to be beneficiaries. They want to be co-designers. They want to think together because this is what they are doing for millennia. And this implies in a revision in the way that we do science. We need to review the trust relationship. We need to plan together, and we need to review our co-authorship framework to include them in the scientific products. And then we need to review our funding agencies, which need to ensure the participation of local communities to create projects with legitimacy. And finally, of course, we need to ensure places where local people can also participate of the decision making to impact public policies with more feasibility and legitimacy. Thank you.
Yeah, so maybe I backtrack a little bit. Well, first of all, the biodiversity and the climate crisis are inextricably linked. I mean, we're talking primarily about climate in this meeting, but both the problems and the solution dimensions of both of those crises are very closely associated. And then quintessential to that are tropical forest environments, which capture most of the biodiversity on Earth, but also a huge amount of the carbon stock. So, for example, when you deforest the tropics or you degrade these tropical forests, you're not only contributing to greenhouse gases, maybe 15 to 25% every year, but you're also erasing the biodiversity and the very ecosystem resilience of that protects us against climate change in the first place. Now, protected areas is a huge cornerstone in both in terms of the climate and the biodiversity agenda. The problem is that in the tropics, protected areas are severely underfunded, severely understaffed, and under-equipped, and they're not really prepared for the onslaughts that will come sooner or later. So what we're seeing now is that every time these tropical protected areas, for example, in the Amazon, confronts these external pressures, they fall by the wayside, they become increasingly degraded. And this we're seeing increasingly as the agricultural, the mining, the land grabbing frontiers approach these areas. Now, in terms of what João said, what we're doing in the Juruá is a bit of a paradigm shift, because we're doing protection based on local community management. How does that work? So they are essentially benefiting from market access, fairer prices to sell, the certified sustainably harvested fish in the case of Arapaima. And in exchange, they're actually protecting all the harvest sites, the management sites. And as a consequence, they end up protecting an area 86 times larger than the aggregate area of the Oxbow Lakes managed by any given community. If you scale this up to the whole of the state of Amazonas alone, that's about 15 million hectares of floodplain forest protected by that program. Now, none of the taxpayers are actually paying for any of this, because they're essentially individual households are incurring all the costs of protection. So this is a cheap mode of protection, but it's inherently unfair. So we've suggested, for example, a payment for ecosystem service program to compensate for all this work. And then if you scale this up to all the riverine communities across the whole Brazilian Amazon and lake-sized communities, you could be protecting another perhaps 120 million hectares of forest, okay? And this is largely in addition to the 220 million hectares of protected areas across the Brazilian Amazon in all modes of protection. But remember that most of these areas lack implementation. They're essentially paper parks, so paper reserves, so paper indigenous territories. And eventually, once they're confronted with these external pressures, they will essentially fall by the wayside. Now, the mechanism that João is describing essentially places people on a 24/7 basis all year round, protecting these sites. So there is community-based surveillance, vigilance, and enforcement against external pressure. And what we end up seeing is this amazing recovery of historically overexploited species. The entire aquatic megafauna of the Juruá has been recovering. So this represents an enormous program of community-based trophic rewilding, if you like, because all the top predators, all the apex carnivores are also being restored into the system. And we can actually show this quantitatively because we track the success of this program. And I would say that this is not the only solution, but it's a very important tool in the toolbox that we have today, because most of these disenfranchised communities would be quite happy to join a program like this if they are deriving, a benefit like an annual windfall in sales of sustainably harvested non-timber forest resources or fish.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, both of you. So I think it contextualizes it very, very well. And there was one part there is, if you want to start looking at how you can impose these sustainably protected areas, there's going to be a level of policy engagement that's going to be needed there. And obviously that's quite a challenging labyrinth to navigate. So I'd like to bring in our first virtual speaker, Professor Mercedes Bustamante. You've done quite a significant amount of work on forest ecology and land use change, specifically about how we can bring Amazon back from ecological tipping points. So from your perspective, you've worked a lot at the science policy nexus. What forms of scientific evidence have you seen are most persuasive, let's say, in shaping these policies that can then be deployed at municipal level, but then also at state and then hopefully even at federal level?
Yeah, so good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues, Carlos, João, Mariana, and Andy. And first of all, I would like to thank the initiative of Frontiers Planet Prize for championing scientific inquiry and also for using your platform to amplify the urgent message of sustainability and global change science. Regarding your questions, I think there are 2 points that we need to evaluate that are critical for the Amazon conservation and also the conservation of other tropical ecosystems. The first one is the evidence that drives policy, but also the institutional structures that are needed to sustain it. So scientific evidence is much more persuasive if it involves clear, actionable data and near real-time monitoring. Carlos mentioned in the end of his speech, so this is just one tool in a toolbox. So this is one important component, I think, that we need really a menu of different alternatives and solutions for different contexts. So it's important to understand that besides the focus on actionable data, localized data are especially relevant for policymakers. So they often respond better if the evidence is directly linked to actions. And I can give you some examples that were most important in the case of Brazil controlling deforestation, is how we can use satellite data to monitor deforestation in near real time and connect this information to prosecutors' offices at the municipal, state, and federal level, so that they can almost immediately act to contain and to fight deforestation. So integrating all this monitoring information on deforestation, but also on biodiversity, on land use, on hydrological cycles, directly into policies, and also provided information directed to policymakers and to federal and state agencies is quite important. So there are then 2 points that I would like to stress: clear, actionable data linked to concrete actions. And also another point that was highlighted in both presentations from João and Carlos, how we can highlight not just co-benefits, there are not co-benefits, but synergies. When you talk about the climate agenda, that is clear connected to the biodiversity agenda, but also to the livelihood agenda, to all the different sustainable development goals. So if we can really say there are here a lot of potential to act together, to bring different policy agendas together, to see these benefits, and also breaking these silos between the different policy sectors, so that we can do much more, faster, better, with lower costs. I think this is one important aspect also, so trying to stress the synergies. And the last point that I would like to stress, and that was also mentioned in this case, that is quite relevant. So how we can really try to show the economic benefits of conservation. So there is this idea that we need to deforest to have economic development, but now what this example is showing very clear, that social development, economic development, social justice is really connected to good conservation ideas. So I think these are three points that are quite relevant when you think about how science can drive good policies. So clear actionable data, localized data, linked to concrete actions, and try to show synergies, benefits, and also try that to link to local economies and social development.
Thank you, Mercedes. I think that's the clearest and most succinct answer I've heard to that question, which actually is quite complex in some ways. So it's very important to highlight these co-benefits, and I think the economic incentives will always be a good lever for deployment of these kind of initiatives. I think that naturally will bring in, I'd like to bring in Dr. Mariana Ferreira from WWF. And kind of dovetailing on what Mercedes was saying just then, you know, the mandate of WWF is essentially doing that, linking biodiversity conservation with sustainable livelihoods. So from your experience, how can this science not just kind of redefine conservation, but also form a new paradigm shift to how conservation should be restorative and also inclusive? So yeah, over to you, Mariana.
Thank you, Gilbert, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to take part in this panel with some of the best science authorities we have in the Global Academy, talking about conservation of the Amazon, also about the Cerrado. I'm so glad that we have the opportunity to discuss the importance of proactively bridging this knowledge implementation gap to actually guide sustainable development and the conservation agenda. In WWF Brazil, we are proud to say that we are a science-based organization, which means not only using the best information available in our decision-making processes, in our projects, but also establishing relevant partnerships with scientific institutions, organizations, and also defending science in the moments of darkness. And I can share some of the partnerships that we have, but I think that going directly to your question, I feel that more and more scientists are providing important information to support what we already knew from the field experience, from working with local partners, with communities, that we can no longer frame conservation approaches apart from the social and the economic contexts of the regions. Scientific data with trusted protocols and sound results are actually essential so that we can ensure that not only the funding, but also the public and the private policies are part of this shift. And I'm happy to share with you a concrete example of how we're doing this, how we're implementing this in probably the largest tropical forest conservation program in the world, which I'm involved since I joined WWF in 2009. And I'm talking about the ARPA program, the Amazon Region Protected Area Program, that was established in 2002. ARPA was also a result of the first systematic conservation planning exercise that was done for the Amazon in the late 90s. So after the exercise, we knew that we had a major coverage conservation gap in the Amazon. And this was one of the forces behind establishing ARPA, which is a program that actually supported the creation of more than 27 million hectares of new protected areas in the Amazon over the years. Right now, ARPA supports the implementation of 120 protected areas, which covers more than 60 million hectares. And the program will last until 2039. And 3 years ago, it was great to prove at least that a part of the mission of the program was proven successfully. And so we published together in collaboration with scientists from Minas Gerais University and how the program was responsible to avoid about 260,000 hectares of deforestation between 2008 and 2020. Which prevented the emissions of more than 100 million tons of CO2. This study also showed that even during the challenging times of Bolsonaro government, when deforestation was completely out of control in the Amazon, the ARPA protected areas, they suffered less. The increased rates of deforestation in these areas represented only 40% of what would be expected if there were no support of the program. It's important to say that ARPA is not an NGO conservation program. It is a program led by the Brazilian government. It is a public policy, and that's what we really need to really change the status of Amazon conservation. So we were happy with these results, but not completely, because we saw with concern the increasing number of protected area invasion, land grabbing, mining inside those areas, fires. So we started to discuss if these areas were actually resilient enough so that we would not lose their integrity after the program ends in 2039. During this reflection, we were celebrating the 20 years of the program, and we had a chance to visit the Tapajós Arapiuns Extractive Reserve. And I think that then it was when all connected, right? And ARPA was actually developed in the late 90s. So its approach was primarily focused on protected area management and biodiversity conservation. Even though half of the program's protected areas, 60 areas, are extractive and sustainable development reserve. So we needed to add a new vision to the program, integrating what we already were doing and in other areas in field, what local organizations and science has been showing us, that we would not have resilient areas if the communities living there was suffering from disrupted governance, food insecurity, and lack of tools, capacity to protect their territories and to provide for their livelihoods. So over the last 3 years, we were developing this program with a lot of collaboration from community leaderships, from the government, and we actually build the whole theory of change of this program based on a lot of the science and the work that we're discussing here. João, your work was an important reference for the development of ARPA Comunidades. And actually on Monday, we are launching this program, and it will be a 15-year program focusing on promoting social bioeconomy in these areas, and so finding the market links and funding economic needs for this non-forest project is sustainable chains, and we will support the strengthening of local community organizations and proactively supporting youth and women protagonism and leadership in the program. There is a third component looking at improving access to energy and internet, and additional ways how can we really make sure that these areas have better governance, better access to the tools that they need to really be able to protect these territories. And much of what was done in Juruá reserves were like a great reference to this development. So I think this is a little bit of what we are doing, how we are integrating science and how science is really helping us to make sure that the shift in the paradigm is not at a local level, that we can and we are able to do this in a much larger scale. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mariana. I think there's so many pieces to what the WWF are doing there that we can dissect, and I think I want to hold on to one small thing that you mentioned, which is, under the pressure of the different political cycles that come into place, how do you sustain engagement and impact when you're faced with all of this uncertainty of how you can continue? But nonetheless, the upcoming work you're doing, it's we're thinking very much on a holistic level. It sounds extremely interesting, and I wish you all the best with that. And what I want to now just probably redefine this research agenda as I'm really pleased that we have Professor Andy Purvis from the Natural History Museum, who's joining us this afternoon online. And a bit of context: he is a global leader in biodiversity indicators, and was also the co-author of another winning article at the Francis Planet Prize that also won $1 million US, and that was understanding the human drivers of biodiversity loss, and that was with leading researchers at Luxembourg Institute of Health and Conicet Mendoza, I believe, with Dr. Pedro Jauregui, if I can pronounce that correctly. Okay, so Andy, I'd like to bring you on and ask you, how were you were involved in this global study of drivers of biodiversity, and how do these findings relate to the work that we're listening to and we've learned today from Carlos and Joao? If you're still with us. No. Okay, if he comes back on, then I'll readdress that question afterwards. So then maybe I would like to go back to the policy question that I was referring to before. And that is, in Brazil, we're seeing that science policy coalitions are extremely important and crucial in advancing forest protection and all of the ecosystem restoration that needs to happen. But this continuity, as I mentioned, can be disrupted by these very abrupt political cycles. So a question I'd like to open to start with you both is, what mechanisms or governance mechanisms or institutional safeguards are there in place that allows you to continue this work and ensure that science-based conservation strategies remain stable, long-term, and impactful? So either of you want to start?
Well, one important, I think that one important governance technology that we have been observing in Amazonia is called a polycentric governance model, where we are create environments to put together local leaders, NGOs, private sectors, government, and even funders to think strategies to improve livelihoods and ensuring biodiversity protection. We have a very important example called Coletivo do Pirarucu Collective. It's a group of dozens of organizations, from grassroots organization up to federal government. So we have about 3 or 4 meetings every year discussing the challenges that we have in different scales. And then we can fundraising together, we can establish long-term partnerships, and we can influence, we can impact public policies in a very interesting way, because this is a way that we can really adapt public policies to the aspiration and to the needs of the front line. So this is very important. Through these mechanisms, we strengthened lots of public policies, and there are other being created. And this polycentric governance means that we have different decision-making environments with different actors, but then we have some major meetings when we can put everyone together to discuss the best strategy. I think that this is a very promising model to strengthen the community-based conservation in Amazon.
Yeah, and then just adding to that, the model that we have in the Juruá is completely scalable, and it doesn't really depend on public policy. It doesn't really depend, because it's a grassroots motivated phenomenon. And it's facilitated by the fact that our model incurs a very low opportunity cost to local communities. Most of these local communities have a very diverse household portfolio in terms of their economic. And these activities are very seasonal, and they fit in with the rest of their annual schedule throughout the year. But then they benefit from some critical supplementary income, and then all the livelihood improvements that João talked about, including education, access to healthcare, electrification, the information technology, access to markets, etc. And you can see that the communities that basically join the program after a few years, they're actually doing better. They are doing better not just in terms of the standard socioeconomic metrics, but also things that are more difficult to quantify, such as time spent with their families, happiness, etc. So and that basically reverts into a huge kind of pride in their cultural identity and etc. And it's a scalable model. I mean, so Instituto Juruá may not be able to do all this because we don't necessarily have the muscle, but we definitely have the know-how, and we can train other agencies to roll this out to other river basins elsewhere. Okay.
I think the most important thing that we see here is that it seems to be a triple win, a triple win scenario. Low costs, extreme, like a lot of opportunity that also help these local people to live very fulfilling lives at the same time. Reverting this now to our online participants. So Mercedes, would you have any thoughts to counter that?
Yeah, thank you, Hubert. This is a very important question. So we know that building broad-based coalitions is really a key strategy for challenging political times. Mariana mentioned the period of the last federal administration in Brazil with the increase of deforestation, but it was not just increase in deforestation, it was also the organized crime that was stimulated to advance in the Amazon region. So this makes the situation much more complex now. So and we know that the most resilient policies are those policies that are supported by diverse stakeholders. So as João mentioned, this idea of the polycentric governance, but we must include the alliance that can build with indigenous organizations, agricultural sectors that are connected also to sustainability, and I mentioned in the previous questions, municipal, state, and federal government levels, but also the private sector. So this united front is really important to buffer conservation strategies against political shifts. And in particular, in the case of the Amazon, I think that the other important aspect is to consider in the Amazon, we have just different local contexts, but also we need to consider the Amazon as a regional entity. So transboundary conservation initiatives and also transboundary governance, so then considering the whole Amazonian basin is quite relevant. So how we manage these common resources and how we can learn from each other. And in this sense, what I think is really nice with the idea of the ARPA comunidades and also the Juruá project is this indigenous territories and protected areas are not just corridors for biodiversity and energy and matter fluxes and so on. So, but this also, they are also corridors for intercultural exchange. So, and this idea that we can really know from each other and exchange experience and traditional practices, sustainable innovation, but also scientific knowledge and how we can co-evolve, not just co-design, but co-evolve with this knowledge exchange. This is quite important. But most of all, I think this is an important aspect that I would like to stress in this period that we are living with a lot of geopolitical changes. The rule of the law and democracy is a huge component of diverse and sustainable use, climate action, and biodiversity protection. So let's not forget that. So we really need, when we're considering the different organizations that are in the region that are trying to exploit natural resources in an unsustainable way. We really need the rule of the law and democracy to find ways to find all this chains of organized crime that are now dominating some parts of the Amazon region. Thank you.
Thank you, Mercedes. Over to you, Mariana.
No, I fully agree with all that you've said. And I think that there are important things that we learned and based on challenging times from the pandemics to an administration that was really anti-environment. I think that strengthening local grassroots organizations is key. In the worst moments, they were in the front line, and we need them to be, stronger and prepared. And so we saw that, for instance, in indigenous lands that had a better, improved governance systems, how they were able to respond to the COVID pandemic's threats faster than others. So I think this is the first step. But in another scale, I think that having these coalitions of multiple partners that can include the government, but not only the government, are key. ARPA was one of the inspirations for what we call a PFP approach, the project for finance approach for permanence. So it's long-term projects, and we need to consider the threat of a very challenging political or economic context in the next 15 or 20 years when we are drafting these programs. And a significant part of how we do this is a very thoughtful way of building the governance of these programs. The second thing is about conditions, how you lock in, the commitments from partners, from donors, also commitments from the government. So you make sure that you can't just, significantly destroy or change those programs with a decision of a single partner. So I think we know ways how to do it. It's a matter of how can we really make it at scale and share this knowledge.
I think that's a really great overview. So we're seeing that, focusing on lock-in of partners and donors, highlighting co-benefits and the fact that this is a grassroots movement. These are great ways to ensure that you can have continuity through all these initiatives. So that's a big thank you to Mariana for that. I assume, Andy, you're still not online. If you are, feel free to say hi. If not, okay, I take it he's not going to be with us, unfortunately. Let's take a step. I want to take a step back and have a few concluding remarks. And this is where I'd like to really hear more about the agency of science in guiding all of these decisions, especially when you want to be supporting grassroots initiatives. So if I talk a bit about the Frontiers Planet Prize, and this is the goal of what we want to do. Okay, our mission is to enable healthy lives on a healthy planet. And it's by recognizing breakthrough research. And what we're seeing more and more is that this breakthrough research is transformative, and it's the transdisciplinarity is very, very important as well. So to a question that I'd like to have from the policy output, but also insights from yourself, Carlos and Joao. What would your message be to other scientists, institutions, or research centers that have a shared agenda as us? How can we amplify and replicate these lessons learned from today so that we can also replicate these in other vulnerable bioregions? What would you like to say to them?
Yeah, no, I think you need to capitalize on powerful research that has a large-scale impact, particularly things that are scalable models that can work in different regions. Of course, all of these things are context dependent, depending on what regions of the planets that you are. But I think just taking advantage of the fact that Andy is not here, I was going to say something about biodiversity metrics because our fifth speaker didn't turn up for some reason. I mean, so we live in the age of targets, including protected area targets. So you have the 30 by 30, you have half Earth, and all of these ambitious targets. I don't see this so much only about area targets in terms of what fraction of a huge domain like the Amazon is actually protected, but also the integrity of those forests and domains. So we do need much better biodiversity metrics, biodiversity indicators that actually show what these protected areas are actually setting aside and protecting in perpetuity into the future. Because we all know about remote sensing techniques. We can now easily quantify deforestation, even forest degradation, structural degradation. But the fact is, to what degree are these protected areas doing their jobs in terms of protecting a full complement of species? All critters, great and small. And this is one of the areas where science can really help us. Recently we won second place in the X Prize Rainforest, and we basically showed how we can basically efficiently monitor these areas with eDNA, iDNA, basically drones, and also soundscapes, to help us understand what these areas are actually protecting. Because the concept of protection is varies hugely depending on how you actually measure that level of protection.
Oh, João, yes.
Yes, no, just moving forward in like some take-home message. I think that the diversity is the most important foundation of Amazonia. Cultural diversity, biodiversity, and ecosystem diversity. I think we need to observe diversity in science, in policy as well. I think that one of the most important lessons that I had in Amazon is that science is a collective action. Actually, is the most important way to go longer is to making multi-partnerships, and this is very important, all kinds of partnerships. I think this is very important. And also I'd like to highlight, I'm super grateful with Frontiers Prize because we applied the entire amount of the money to the front line. And this is very important to expand the models. We need to find mechanisms to deliver the funding to the front line and not to spend the money in the structures of the organization. So this is very important as well. Yeah, I think is it.
I think that's a great way to promote promote why you should participate in the prize, because it's all invested in frontline impact, and that's great. I can't see if you have your hands up, but I'll say, Mariana, do you have some closing words that you'd like to share?
Yeah, sure. I think that one thing that we didn't talk a lot today is about communication. I think that it's a must, it's an obligation of who is doing science to focus on communication. And that's why I'm really enjoy and like and great, and I feel grateful to be a part of the Frontier in Science initiative on the Articles Hub, because we need to go beyond the articles, the scientific articles. We need, like Mercedes do so well, to talk to people in the news, through magazines, through lectures. I think that is something that, and there are great scientists who does in Brazil and a huge amount that still not do it. So we need, as scientists, to also be great communicators. Over to you, Mercedes.
Thank you, Mariana, for your words. And I'm also, as part of the jury, I'm quite happy to hear that the money of the prize is going directly to the communities and to the front line. So I would say that we have three important tasks ahead. Regarding tropical ecosystems, we still have a lot of open questions. We still need to improve the understanding of ecological interactions. We still have areas that are under survey, probably with a lot of new species that the science is still not recognize or identify. I think that also, so basic monitoring is still an important question. The second point is not just monitoring the ecology of the systems, but also trying to follow up the policies that are being implemented. Are they being effective? successful, how we can change that. So really trying to implement some adaptive management of the policy cycle, I think is an important task for science as well. The other point that I would like to stress, and particularly for the global south and the tropical region again. So we need to improve the organization of the data that we are collecting in the field, and also trying to improve the catalog of the good experience that we have. For example, the two programs that were mentioned here. So how we can have an open access initiative, not just for environmental data, but also for different experience that people can see, oh, maybe there is a way to move forward there in my region if I do the adaptations that are necessary. So I say, and then the last point, as Mariana also mentioned, communication is key. We need to have more scientists talking to society, trying to understand different points of view, and trying to understand also different contexts in terms of policy implementation. But don't let us to forget that we still have a lot to understand in terms of the functioning and the responses of tropical ecosystems and biodiversity. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mercedes. And I think to layer that, about the communications aspect, one thing that I personally find very uplifting about this, it's the storytelling aspect of this work. It's very rare to be able to come up with very robust scientific research that has such a wide impact on how people can really understand and can feel the emotive aspect of your work of actually lifting people. There's a lot of socioeconomic wealth that comes with the work you're doing as well, which is great. We have a couple of minutes left, so whilst I've exhausted everything on my side and we've gained some time from unfortunately Andy not joining us, I'd like to open the floor to any final points from our panelists. Yeah, feel free to. Yes, is that Mercedes?
I would like to make a final point that I think is important, because one of your questions mentioned resilience, and visually we think of resilience against these electoral cycles of 4 and 5 years, and in these interactions with indigenous peoples around the globe, we need to change the temporal scale of resilience, because resilience for them is a question of centuries and millennia. So, and I think that this is important to keep in mind when sometimes you think, oh, this is our hard times, we don't see a solution in front of us, and maybe we need to keep in mind there are people struggling with these questions for a long time and still they're resistant. So we need to keep that in mind as well. I think this is an important lesson of these interactions with different knowledge systems.
It's also important for the next generation as well. Like, you have to go and exert this sense of resilience and perseverance if you want this to be sustained beyond different generations. Great. Any final words from either of you?
Just going the same direction of Mercedes, but also we need to think about the time when we are doing science and conservation together. I think that one of the most important issue is to build a solid relationship with local communities, and trust takes time. So this is important to review the timing of the projects, because sometimes you cannot build like a solid relationship in 2 or 3 years. So it's very important to plan, to have time to build this trust relationship. So I think that it can strengthen a lot the co-production of scientific products or policies, or the generation of knowledge.
Yeah, and then maybe just one final thought. I mean, I was born and raised in Belém, right here in this town, and I've been an observer of the Amazonian issues in terms of conservation development, ever since the mid 70s. And one of the things that really changed within my lifetime is the public lands in the Amazon. They've been largely privatized by land grabbing. So the thing about local community management and empowering local community, it greatly helps fill that power vacuum in these places that are up for grabs by the much more predatory enterprising sector, the land grabbing, the logging sector, the cattle ranching sector, the mining sector, etc. And this is what's basically bringing down the lost wilderness of these lost tropical wildernesses, such as the Amazon and the Congo Basin. I wouldn't exclude Borneo and parts of Southeast Asia. So I think local communities have a huge role to play in terms of guarding these, the lost of the wild, if you like. And they are, after all, the legitimate guardians of these wildlands. And I think they greatly help to, decrease the amount of privatization that's basically happened in the last 50 years or so.
All right, thank you very much, Carlos. Mariana, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, fully agree with Carlos. We must more and more find ways to support and recognize the work and the value of the local communities as safeguards of the forests. I think we need to find alternative solutions, innovative solutions that makes sense for these communities, long-term solutions go beyond, projects, short initiatives. I think that's how we're also going to make sure that the Amazon resists. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. So I wish I'd taken notes about everything we discussed, but it seems to be a plethora of different interplays of what's needed to replicate this kind of work. So we spoke about the actual research itself, having a strong local context for those communities that are on the front line and are the most vulnerable to ecological collapse. At the same time, ensuring that we can lock in strong partnerships, funding, have a very strong research agenda to push this forward, and adaptive policy making, specifically during different policy cycles. And then the other side is just making sure that we have very strong communication that is built as the outputs of that research to shape the agenda, and also to ensure we can sustain that impact. And then to close this off, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. These kind of things take a lot of time. It needs perseverance, it needs passion, inspiration, and the ability for you to really remain focused so that this can be sustained beyond each generation, because this is something that is here to stay with us, and we need to act together, policy, the private sector, and science. And obviously, keeping this a grassroots initiative with the local communities. So with that, I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for those who came to listen to us. I know that you're not very many, but I hope this did fill you with hope of something that I find a beautiful story. So thank you very much. And that's it. Thank you.